Joining us now, LZ Granderson, sports and culture columnist at the Los Angeles Times, and Cheryl Dorsey, retired LAPD police sergeant. She's the author of Black and Blue, the creation of a social advocate. Sergeant Dorsey, great to have your expertise. As you watch what's happening here in Kenosha, they keep falling back on we can't say anything from the sheriff's department because, there's this investigation going on. We can't say anything. So they've offered no explanation this week for their side of the story. Does it make sense that they can't say anything because of the investigation?
Well, they can't say anything because they're still trying to craft a rationale for that officer having shot Mr. Blake in the back 7 times. And now they further exacerbated the situation by having Mr. Blake handcuffed to a bed like a dog is chained to a tree. Listen, I've worked security for prisoners who've been hospitalized, and if there's an officer standing sentry, then why is Mr. Blake handcuffed after all? He's paralyzed from the waist down. And what does the hospital staff have to say about that? Because they can intervene if they want to and say that we can't provide proper treatment as long as he's handcuffed. And so I think all of them are culpable, and if this were a white suspect, I promise you he would be treated much better given the seriousness of his injuries.
So LZ, the president mentioned Kenosha by name, but did not mention Jacob Blake in any form or fashion. What did you hear in that?
I just heard more of the same. We know who this man is, and many of us who covered the campaign in 2016, as I did, we recognize who his supporters were. And honestly, John, there's no surprise that he did not mention Jacob Blake or any of the victims by name because that doesn't support his narrative. The irony of someone quite possibly violating the Hatch Act, referring to themselves as the protector of law and order, when all of your associates, close associates, have been convicted and you've had to actually get them out of jail, when you yourself have been impeached, and yet you still position yourself as the person who's going to protect America and be the president of law and order. Well, of course, we don't expect you to actually recognize true victims because you're still characterizing yourself as a victim, despite your white privilege and everything that you've inherited and everything that you've been given.
Sergeant Dorsey, with the lack of information, obviously our brains try to fill in the blanks. The Attorney General in Wisconsin has said that a gun was found in Jacob Blake's car. Would that ever be a justification for absolutely a knife, let me correct myself, was found on the floorboard of his car. Would that be any justification for being shot in the back 7 times?
Has nothing to do with anything. The knife, if there is one, was in the car. He was not. And listen, you saw an officer who couldn't control a situation, and he started hunting Mr. Blake down like an animal with his gun drawn, prepared to shoot. And so when he couldn't control him, he did the only thing that officers seem to know to do when they're dealing with a black suspect is shoot first and then figure out why later. They're still trying to figure that out.
LZ, one of the things I am struck by, again, there's an issue of what's right and what's effective. And we talked in our last segment and over the show in the convention about whether or not the president's messaging on this will be effective politically. I want to leave that aside. I want to talk now about what's right. What's evident is the president's direct attack on cities. I can't imagine a Democrat attacking farm country by name the way that President Trump attacked cities by name. Stuff like mob rule is very evocative. Talking about suburbs being taken over and inundated is very evocative there. And it's just very specific messaging coming out of a convention at a time when America is raw. And I want to know what you think the impact will be.
Well, in all fairness, it's not as if there's a lot of love between some liberals and rural America. I mean, if we're going to keep it 100, I'm going to do just that. Secretary Clinton called his supporters deplorables. So I think both sides need to reevaluate how we talk about each other. I believe that both Democrats and Republicans have lost a little bit of control when it comes to civility. President Trump aside, and I say that he's aside because he's truly isn't a Republican. He's not a Democrat. He's a narcissistic asshole. And so we can't use him as the barometer for whether or not the parties need to find civility. What we need is a moment of empathy. What we need is to be able to look at each other and say, just because we disagree on how to make America work doesn't mean that those that we disagree with are trying to destroy America. I understand that he's the president. I understand that he has supporters, but we had these issues before him, and we will have these issues after him if we don't address the gap in empathy for one another, regardless of political affiliation or even regardless of any other thing that makes us different. I don't think pointing out our differences causes these problems. What causes our problems is assuming that one difference is superior to the other, whether it's race, whether it's gender identity or sexual orientation, whether it's religion or being non-religious. We have to stop treating each other like less than because they're different.
Sergeant Dorsey, we only have about 10 seconds left. Your final thoughts?
Fish rots from the head. We've heard racial animus being spewed by the police chief. I understand why this officer would shoot a black man in the back 7 times unjustly.
Cheryl Dorsey, LZ Granderson, thank you both very much.